Hello and welcome to the last tutorial of the Process Redesign tool. Today we'll be talking about reporting implementation and reporting effectiveness of measures. If you have not yet seen the intro to the topic, please refer to my LinkedIn account. You will find an intro presentation that helps you find your way into the tool and into the subject. So let's get started on the tutorial. So far we have covered the setup of the tool, the analytics of the process you want to improve, and how to break it down into process steps and analyze it with the tool of the swim lane. And from that point on, identify potentials, shortcomings within the processes, and derive measures from these potentials and shortcomings to respond and to improve the process. Furthermore, we have defined concepts to give priority to certain measure ideas that help us define the measure plan. Now we'll be talking about tracking the measure implementation and tracking the measure effectiveness. For this purpose, there are a couple of recommended actions. First of all, you have to have a measure flat file where to capture the information. This is already available in form of the measure reporting flat file, which we will have a look at a little bit closer during this tutorial. Second, you would have to organize Azure Fix where to review with your team what has been going on with the measure implementation. Then you will have to fill the flat files to provide the information you'll be discussing. Then you need to consolidate and you need to discuss the progress in your Azure Fix. So everything fairly intuitive, nothing unexpected. So what are the key questions that need to be covered when reviewing your measure implementation and your measure effectiveness? Well, we need to see whether we progress with the implementation. So that is reviewing the roadmap and how we're advancing. We need to see whether we have our costs that we have planned for the implementation under control. Are we within budget limits? We need to see whether there are any difficulties ahead. So the forecasting portion, difficulties that may pose problems in finalizing the implementation. And once we have implemented the measure, to see whether this is paying off in terms of improving the process itself. How does the tool help us? Well, we will see first of all the consolidated follow-up views that are available in the planning and follow-up system. We will see how the data come into the system, and we see how the reporting file digests the data input from the measure owner and prepares that for further consolidation. One short recap, we have two parts within the tool. That is the measure reporting file and the consolidation part of it, which is in the planning and follow-up system. In the measure reporting file, we have two input tables. The first is the implementation report, where we gather information on the roadmap, on timeliness of implementation, and on budget questions, whether we are on track with our budget. Second, we have the KPI report. So once we have completed implementation, we will see the effectiveness of the measure itself to the process. And for that purpose, there is a set of benchmark KPI values that are on a certain interval will be checked against the real performance of the process. Whereas the implementation report gets transformed into an upload table in the background of the measure reporting flat file, the KPI report will also give you a performance graph where you can check without even consolidating the measure performance, and when measure performance gets critical, comment on that per data point. Last but not least, KPI report values and implementation report values will be consolidated by means of Power Query. That is a functionality within the planning and follow-up system, and provide the information needed to see the consolidated KPI reports and the consolidated implementation report. So the reports on a set of measures that are applied to the process and are viewed on an aggregated level. The big advantage is with that consolidation possibility or functionality that you do not have to manually transform data any longer or prepare data for a review. This can be done by means of clicking a button, and this button is this one right here. It's in the menu Data. It's the Update All button. Sorry for the German here, I don't have an English system. And once you have touched this button, within at best 10 seconds, at worst maybe a minute, all the data that has been provided in the flat files and the flat files that have been then saved on the path folder that you've provided to the consolidation system will be sucked into the consolidation system automatically. All graphs will be updated, all functionality will be updated, and you can start consuming, analyzing, or reporting the data on a group level or on a consolidated level. So now that we have discussed how the data flows from the flat file to the consolidation and to the consolidation reporting tool, we will now have a look at the reporting flat file itself, and the first part of it was the implementation report. The implementation report consists of a one-pager that is, first of all, a very concise overview of the project, its roadmap, its cost information, a forecast, and the actual costs that have been observed. It can be subdivided into different sections. The first section being the project base and review information, so that is the project name, the project ID, a short description, but also automatic fields just like the last update, which the system calculates itself depending on when you did the last change to the tool and saved it. Of course, the measure responsible, the next review time, that depends on the review pattern you have implemented or you have provided to the tool. So that could be monthly, quarterly, weekly, bi-weekly, whatever. And on this basis, the review times are automatically calculated. Next section are the review and the roadmap information. So when do you plan, forecast, and complete the different implementation levels? We have already reviewed the meaning and the importance of implementation levels in the last tutorial. And this box also includes the costs as to plan, as to forecast, and as to effective actual costs. These two boxes provide the information that will be sent over to the consolidation tool later on. All the other information are not mandatory. You can fill in the open point list, or you can leave that aside. It will not affect the functionality of the consolidation tool. Same applies to the work packages. You have below. Those work packages relate always to the actual implementation level you're in, or the actual project phase you're in, and give a nice little overview on the activities that remain open or the status they are in. Please note that will, of course, because it's not unstandardized information, not be handed over to the consolidation tool. What happens next to the first two boxes we've been reviewing, the project base information and the roadmap and the cost information? Well, in the background, there is a functionality that translates that information into a table, and that table will be automatically shifted or consolidated by the consolidation tool. So no activity or no actions needed from your side. That works automatically. Something that also works automatically upon entry of data is the measure effectiveness graph. The measure effectiveness graph shows you a little graph on how your actual values of the KPI that measures success of your measure does compared to the benchmark or the benchmark channel. Let's so say that the benchmark for the alignment of reporting calendar, which project was to reduce lateness of report, and you said you wanted to have only 12 reports late in the first half of or in the first months of the project before it gradually goes down, and you would accept still between 8 and 16 days, which still be fine. If you leave that channel, you will get such a red little bullet, and that calls for commenting. This is where you would expect somebody to say a word, what went wrong or what went particularly good, and helped you to make or to fail your benchmark. This channel, or the width of the channel, can be adjusted right here. So the thresholds are plus minus 30% at the moment with regards to the benchmark. You can set that also to 5%, and then it will narrow. You can set it to 100%, and your fluctuation channel will be bigger. So this is the last slide of the tool, of the presentation to the tool. We will go into the tool now itself to find out about the functionalities of the different analytics on consolidated level. It is easier and more fun to see that live instead of using slides. So now we are on the reporting flat file and can have a short look how really data input works. Let's start from the top. The measure ID is an input field. You would just put in the measure ID, and that's it. The name of the measure is also an input field. You can copy and paste that from the consolidation tool. Description, also input field, no problem. These here as well. You have options here on the reporting interval. It is very important that you use the intervals that are suggested and not come up with your own. You can change that in terms of customizing efforts, but as these are trigger words, they will have an effect on how that tool calculates. So if you're entering different information than this, either you would have to change the calculation concept, or you will produce, unfortunately, mistakes. But I think these are the most common ones, and it seems worthwhile using them for the start. The first KPI report due date is, I believe, self-speaking. Here you are giving the first dates that you want to review the effectiveness KPI. You give a duration that could be either 1, 2, or 3 years that you want to review the reporting. Once this is done, you will automatically have the calculation of the last, once this is done, you will not be required anymore to put in any further KPIs or report them, and this we will see has an input on the KPI input itself. Last update is, from my perspective, a very interesting field, because as a project leader, or as a function in leadership, this will give you a good input how well the KPIs and the reporting is maintained. If you see that last update is moving more and more distant to today's date, it seems then that the reporting is not taken seriously enough. Currency, we've covered that already as part of the measure tutorial. This is where you have the ISO codes of the different currencies. You can change that. It's not very difficult. Please refer to the measure tutorial in order to get further information. So with that said, let's have a look what the impact is of this date here, the first KPI report due date. Well, as said before, you will report on the measure effectiveness by putting in a KPI benchmark. So let's say if you want to reduce your reporting errors, you need to have a benchmark where you say, well, I'm happy if the number of errors within a month is coming down according to a certain set of thresholds, and that benchmark threshold is given here. And every month or every reporting interval or reporting day, you will put in the number of errors you have actually observed, and that will give you the graph. Now, what does that have to do with the with the first KPI report due date? The dates that are available here start exactly with this value, and then you see it's week over week. It adds a new data field, and that of course depends on what your input is here. If you have weekly here, you will have weekly intervals. It also gives you the correct dates. If you have bi-weekly or monthly, it will change the intervals. So you don't need to actually look for the right dates. It's already provided for. All other fields here are not input fields. They're all calculated. So don't worry about them. Even if it's NV here, we need this error for the graph. So with this set, you will find the reporting intervals here that have been defined by the first date plus the interval length itself. You can now change the indicator boundary, which are the dotted red lines up and below. You can set that to a new level. Let's put it at maybe 10. And once you have changed any value within the file, you will have to update it. Again, press on Update All, and that will calculate, and tack. Yeah, you see the boundary is now not 30% against the benchmark anymore. It's only plus minus 10%, and any data point that lays outside this fluctuation channel has a red little circle around, and that is the indicator for you that it may be worthwhile going into the measure report and give comments why this data point has measures or has values outside the agreed performance channel. So that helps to identify where the maybe issue was that month or that week, why the process was not running well or why it was perfectly running. We are now in the measure status, so the implementation part of the flat file, and you can see most of the information is already from the base input. So once you have input the head information, it will take it in all different tables and put it there as well, so you don't need to repeat your entries. Here you have the very important part of the plan dates, the forecast date and the complete date, so the roadmap and the forecast, whether you can make the roadmap or not, and what of these implementation levels have already been completed or not. Same applies to what your plan costs are, what your cost forecast is for the whole measure, and what has already actually been spent during the measure implementation. A little bit further below, you will find the table that is derived from the input here and will be sent to the consolidation tool for further aggregation and analysis. So that was the measure flat file, very easy to operate. To update it, it takes, from my perspective, less than 5 minutes. It's not a reporting hustle. Let's now see how several flat files are consolidated into the consolidation tool and what review possibilities we have there. So we're in the consolidation and analytics tool now that uploads into the data model all the information provided by the different flat files. And the first overview that we have is the measure status and cost overview, and that consists of a couple of graphs that give you a nice overview depending on which measure ID you're filtering on. At the moment we are in 1 F3 M1, and we can see that there is a total of 7 phases, so a total of 7 implementation levels, and 3 of them are already completed. That is the kickoff, the concept and the project phase, and the rest is still open. We can see the roadmap to the completion of the measure, and here we see how many phases have been completed at which date. So completed phases is 1 on the 1st of January 2020. The second is in late January. The third has not been completed yet. It has been completed only in late February. And we have the same values here for the plan and for the forecast. So we can say, are we on track? Are we not on track? How much still lays before us? If we have now, let's say, April, we can say, obviously we should have, and we have already forecasted to be completed with phase number 4 and phase number 5. Now it's April, and we are already 2 to 3 weeks late, and we are falling behind with our implementation, and we're not reaching the number of completed phases we were aspiring to. Next one up is the cost reviews. So we say in total we were planning to have 30,200 euros spent on the implementation. We're now looking at 17,000 only. 17,000 is forecasted for the total of the implementation, and that includes cost already spent and cost that we forecast until the end. That is one number, and we have that broken down into the different phases. So you can see when we are already far above our budgeted values in the concept phase, and we're still for the forecasted phase saying that we're coming in a lot leaner and a lot less expensive, then I think a discussion would be worthwhile. From a cash flow point of view, when do we have which costs coming in. It is also interesting to have a little review, and that is on when do we spend how much money, and that depends on how we planned or how actually costs have been forecasted along the way. And here you have the dates, what you spent there, and how much was planned to be spent there. So all in all, we have covered now the questions: are we on track, and are we on track with the budget itself? And that for a single measure. So we have a deep dive here. We have the same on an aggregated level, where we have an overview of the different measures that are run at a certain process. So here on the implementation status list, you will find for all running measures the status, how much you planned in cost, how much in costs you actually spent already, what the difference is, and you also see the delay. So when costs are getting out of control, you have a nice overview when this happened, at which phase, and how you're planning to get on until the end of the measure, until it's finally closed. You can also filter that. You can just pick a couple of measures. You can filter also by measures that are run by a certain person, or you can filter by all the different status of the measures, saying that you only want to have those measures which have been set on status on track or not on track. That helps you get a nice overview and understand how you're progressing. We are now in the performance overview, so in the part where we check measure effectiveness, and here we are looking on basically two graphs. The first is what was our measure benchmark, so what would be our target value, and how did we perform at different points of time. And the same is available not only in the consolidation currency or in the group currency, but also in local currency. So when you're talking to different entities, for them it is important to see their value as they put it in, so to better understand how they're really performing without any foreign exchange fluctuations. On the right side, you have just the delta between the two values, between the benchmark and the actuals. Last but not least, just like with the implementation status, with the effectiveness control as well, you can have the whole overview for all the measures at the same time, where you can see only for the ease of things and for better transparency, the delta versus the benchmark. And let's take, for example, the measure down here that seems to be running well. It is 25% plus, better than the benchmark. Then we had a couple of weak intervals. Now they're back on track. They look all right. And there is another one that is not going too well. So you have a nice time series that helps you understand the development. Now, as you can see, the values and the size of the table is getting rather big, and you can shorten that by using the time intelligence that has been embedded. So instead of taking all data points available for all calendar dates, you can just choose to have 1 month displayed by clicking on the calendar. So now you have only June available. You could also go for an interval from June to October, and you can see things are getting a little bit smoother and smaller here, easier to interpret. So that much from my side. Thank you very much for your interest in the tutorials, in the tool, and in the subject. I hope that helps you. The tool is available. You can download it from my LinkedIn homepage. And I hope on feedback from you, from also giving me some insight in your in you using it. And I hope, yeah, it helps you and it was interesting for you. Thank you very much, and take care.